Hey friends, Jeff here with a new episode of Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today you're in for a treat with our guest, Sharon Rogers. Sharon is the CEO of Amyriad Therapeutics, where they are working extremely hard at advancing effective therapies to fight against Alzheimer's disease. And their tagline, "Memories are worth fighting for," really says it all. In this conversation, we get a full dose of Sharon's heart. We dive into a lot of different topics, her role in the world of being an Olympic figure skating judge, that relationship and what she's learned, how it relates to leadership, how she contends with the realities of a difficult financial market for the biotech industry, and so many other things. Who Sharon is to me is perspective. She is a person of perspective, a perspective of herself, a perspective of the larger reality of the world and how she interacts with others, and also her awareness that her perspective has a ways to go in growing and expanding her perspective on life and the world. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Sharon Rogers. Sharon Rogers, welcome. I am so excited to have you as a guest on the podcast, and just first want to start with that hearty welcome.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, this is a mutual admiration society here. I've been really looking forward to the opportunity to talk with you again.
Sharon, you just heard me do a brief introduction of you and who you are to me. Would love for you to start us off and let us know what you're up to in the world.
Up to in the world right now is mostly, since I'm in the biotech business, is really dealing with the biotech downturn, the associated banking crises that have been going on, and trying to bring some order and stability to the people within my company, making sure that they got all the assurances about how our path forward is going, and just navigating that immediate crisis. So that's what's going on in my world right now. I would like for other things to be going on in my world that are more external to the business, but that will come in due time.
Now, I can't imagine that dealing with the realities of economic challenge is very exciting. What are you most excited about right now?
In the business world or just in general?
Either would be great.
I would say I like to sort of combine those two, because in the business world, I've been through financial downturns before. I know the rhythm that they have. I have a good feeling about how we're going to get out of this one. And when I look at it, I sort of look at it the same way I look at art. And as you know, art's pretty important to me, because this is where people take what's inside them and are able to express it out in some 2 or 3 dimensional format that we can all appreciate. This recovery is going to actually repair itself. It's going to exist by an artistic type of form of movement. And I was at an art fair on the weekend. And so art fairs, art is like my oxygen, because I feel like I can go into those, look at the works that are being made, and transition some of that energy and focus into the way I'm thinking about dealing with crises like this. And there's always a certain sense of positivity from that I appreciate.
That leads really nicely into getting to know you a little deeper, which is one of our goals on this podcast. And we'll do it with this question. Most people ask the question, what do you do? And you just told us a little bit about that. What we like to ask is, what do you love?
I love the relationships with the people who are close to me. That's a real value. But as a passion, art, because I said before, art is my oxygen. It is how I sustain myself. And I'm more of a visual person. I do love music and auditory art, and definitely because of my age, there's something about heavy duty rock and roll that I really enjoy a lot. But visual arts, I can get swept away looking at general 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional art. But in watching dance in particular, I'm taken, just transported to a different place, because a dancer's career is quite brutal, requires a significant amount of work and personal sacrifice. But when you look at it in the scope of life, the time when they can contribute is very brief. And I believe people who devote themselves to dance have a special essence to them, that they're able to do this. They're able to take the music or the surroundings and sort of suck it into their body. And it ends up coming out through their fingers, through their arms, through their toes, through their heads, through the way they take up space. And I just find that mesmerizing. And I never get tired of watching. So yeah, I love that, but it all goes back to sort of human spirit in a way, and a dancer's spirit is usually very strong.
I have to ask a question and not just jump to the next one I had in mind, and that is, and you already pointed to this and how you look at the economics of and the reality of the environment, how you related that to art. So clearly you see life through that lens. I'm wondering, where else does that show up? Where else is, the grocery store, working with your team, dealing with a tough issue, wherever? How does your love and view of art, how does that influence how you see anything in your life?
That's a good question. And you're asking me to think really hard on this, which is, I suppose, a good thing. But those little elements of art are part of our everyday lives. And so it can be something as simple as you're sitting in your car at a traffic light and you're looking at the people who are around you. And you can see something that is sort of, I wonder what they're doing. I wonder what they're thinking. I wonder what they're reacting to. This is all sort of, it sounds very touchy-feely and cosmic, but we are all on a continuum. And I appreciate looking at these small things because, one, it takes me out of myself and my own space, and it lets me try to get some insight on the world around me. But I just find it fascinating. I mean, how could it not be? How could it not be fascinating?
I have to imagine that. And again, I refer back to, where some might look at the economics of the biotech environment and feel a lot of stress. Mm-hmm. Even as you described it before, there was an ease, even how you described the situation. And so I must imagine having that love of art and how you view things, seeing the art in things. I have to imagine that creates a lot of peace and a lot of ease for you.
It does, but I think that comes with experience too. I've seen financial downturns before. I've lived through them before. I would be incorrect if I said it wasn't absolutely brutal. Some moments of it where you're really thinking hard about how to get through to the next step. But no, if you let that overwhelm you, then you sometimes don't see the solution. Sometimes you can't see the path forward if you get too wound up in it. I think that comes a lot with experience, where it's not so new, it's not so startling, it's not so scary. So yes, you can take peace from that. I have a lot of confidence that in the end it will work out. The world is not going to fall apart. So you just take solace in that. And it's very important, I think, for any leader to make sure that you're considering that your staff, your team members, employees who work for you, they may not be so experienced, and they're looking for an anchor in really turbulent times. And you have to be able to provide that for me. So I can't afford to wallow in my own concerns. I really do, for the success of the company and for their well-being. I need to sort of push that away and take a look at what do they need to understand? How do they need to navigate the situation? What can I offer to them that's going to help them see that it's going to be okay?
Yeah. And you pointed to experience, and that is no small thing. You founded your first business in college. You've worked at very large organizations. You've worked at startups. You are where you are now. So you've lived a lot of experiences. And I love the quote by John Ruskin where he says the highest reward for a person's toil is not what they get for it, but what they become by it.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, reflecting on that quote, who have you become over these years and these many experiences?
I sometimes reflect on this, and I am totally in awe of what I've been able to do. Absolutely in awe, coming from relatively humble backgrounds to be where I'm at today, a place where my ancestors and relatives could never have conceived of being where I'm at. And at the same time, I also realize that, as we all are, I am a deeply flawed human being. And you have to become content with the idea that there are going to be elements of yourself that will need improvement, and recognizing those flaws and always trying to be better about them all the time. But if I put it into the overall, I'm in awe. I'm actually in awe that I have this life and that I get to do what I do. I mean, I get paid to do this. How lucky is that? And that philosophy sort of goes back to the father of one of my long-term friends. And he was one of the main directors at the National Science Foundation back in the day. And we were both still in college. And he was sharing his philosophies of life, and he loved to pontificate. But he was really interesting. I'd never met anyone like him. And he said, Sharon, sometimes people get upset if their job is only interesting, 15% of the time, and 85% of the time they're bored or they're frustrated. He said, but if someone else's job is interesting only 5% of the time, that might not seem like much, but your job is 3 times better than their job. And I was just looking at the proportions in a different way. When I was younger, I don't think I had that ability, but meeting people like that makes an impression. I took what he said with me and tried to use that to create perspective on all the massive number of disappointments and setbacks that you go through in life. Mm-hmm. And it's still how I feel about it. So I've become older. I've become hopefully wiser, perhaps less flawed. But if I strive to continue to become anything, it's going to be a little bit more accepting and willing to try to see the individuals around me in a broader perspective, to appreciate their strengths and weaknesses too.
So much there, Sharon. The word, and you've said it 2 or 3 times in there, you have become one with perspective. And that, to me, I don't know that there's no dollar figure that you could put on perspective. Mm-hmm. And so that's just that's who I think leaving this conversation, that's who you'll be. One of the things you'll be to me is one with perspective.
I hope so. And I hope to broaden that, because there's still so much to learn and so much to experience. And one would think that has very little to do with the business life, but I think it has everything to do with the business life. People can become financially successful without gaining that perspective, but financial success alone just isn't enough. I want the personal success, and that comes from, again, realizing things about others and about myself and how we all exist here together on this planet. I think you can do that and be a really successful person.
Yeah, agreed. The name of our show is Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. And I'm curious, when you hear me just state the name of our show, mm-hmm. What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Looking at the broader perspective for patients. Because in life sciences, especially in the pharma business, the bottom line really is treating patients and making their life better. And many times we talk about how to make our development programs better, how to make them more commercially successful, how to fulfill the regulatory guidances. But quite often the question that doesn't get answered, and there's a good reason for it not getting answered, is what is this going to mean in the lives of patients and their families and in the healthcare society in general? And while we'll think about it sometimes, some people will think about it, we don't talk about it. Part of the reason for that is that to get a drug to the market or to get a device to the market or to get something out there, you don't really assess that. You don't take a look at that perspective of it because regulatory authorities can't put a value on that. They can't say, okay, this should be approved for use because of X, Y, and Z. They need some type of a hard metric to use. And so we tend to talk about the hard metrics. And that's perfectly normal. But we don't talk about this other component of it. And yet that drives most executives in some way, shape, or form is knowing, am I going to be doing something that makes an impact on this patient's everyday life? And what would that impact be? And how might it make their life easier? And what I feel like that does is it makes one more committed to the project for that reason, not forgetting the commercial aspects of it because you can't, it's a business. But keeping that in mind is a bigger driver sometimes for me in moving things forward. And I wish we had the chance sometimes as business leaders to be able to talk about these motivational things that we don't often bring up as topics of conversation.
So could you give us a real life example? Again, reserving the details because the exact details aren't so critical, but as you're leading at Amyriad, could you give us an example of what you just described, that conversation, like in a practical sense, in a day, a week, a month, whatever time frame it is, but what does that look like for you and your leadership team to have the patient implications and on their families? What does that look like for you and your leadership?
For me, it looks like a means to motivate our company and to get people driving toward the overall mission goal. Because two of our taglines, one of them is everyone knows someone. And since we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, everyone does know someone. And the other tagline is memories are worth fighting for. Because this is a struggle, this is a fight. So everyone becomes more mission driven when they think about that. I think one of the most discouraging things I ever heard when I was in the early days with my first drug, Aricept, was I was giving a sort of an educational seminar for some healthcare providers. And this was a company that is involved to a great extent in providing insurance for patients with Alzheimer's disease. And we were discussing caregiver burden. Caregiver burden is significant. It falls generally to women. It hits very hard in economically deprived communities where they can't afford to pay someone to come in. And so we were discussing that because it's not a hard metric that you're going to get a drug approved on. It's simply not, and I understand why it shouldn't be. But at the same time, there's a compassionate thing that you need to think about. What are you doing for this patient and their caregiver? And easing caregiver burden. If you can keep someone functional a little bit longer, if they can dress themselves longer, all those things are important for caregiver burden. And I remember the insurance person who was at this meeting said, we don't care about caregiver burden. And I think, you just sort of maintain a neutral face when you hear something like that, but it provides understanding into what are the other drivers of healthcare economy and healthcare treatment. And when you have for-profit motivations, and in the U.S., this is a bigger issue than in Western European countries or even Eastern European countries, and certainly more than in Southeast Asian nations. When you have these profit drivers, this takes up a lot of conversation that most people would hope that they never hear about. So yeah, that's something I think about all the time, thinking about these drivers, because it is important. It's important to a family when their loved one can recognize photos, and you can sit down and talk with them about when Uncle Pat did this or that, and they can have that memory and they can laugh and they can enjoy it. You can't put a price tag on that. It's this intrinsic, intangible, motivating force. So I like to try to ensure that everyone in our company remains mission driven, thinking about that part of it, not just thinking about getting the drug to the market.
Yeah. Are there steps that you've taken to operationalize that, whether it be a checklist for managers when they have one-on-ones or in people's performance goals or their reviews? How have you operationalized something that I don't know that anybody, I can't imagine, well, maybe this insurance person would disagree, but in theory, no one's going to disagree, but the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, and that the operationalizing of that is, and where it actually happens is, how have you at Amyriad operationalized that motivational piece to the patient?
I think that starts at the very beginning when you identify talent that you want to bring into your company. I spend quite a bit of time during an interview process, and for key positions within the company, I make sure I spend time with the person in a one-on-one and have conversation. The conversation is not going to be just directed toward the job. The conversation is going to be probing into other areas to get a general idea of perspective, to get a general idea of their level of compassion, to get a general idea about their willingness to work hard to achieve a goal, but at the same time not losing touch with the reason behind it. So I am willing sometimes to find someone who is perhaps less technically adept, but I know that they're smart enough to figure it out and to learn what they need to do, but they have that insight into the overriding reason for why we're doing what we're doing. Yes, it's a business. Yes, we want to make money, but you can do that in a way that still keeps in mind the overarching goal of the responsibility to the patient, the desire to bring therapies that are going to provide benefit to lives. And these people, there are really tons of them out there. It just takes a little bit more interview time to identify them. So if you bring people like that in from the beginning, when they are interviewing people for their staff, they're going to bring that same perspective. And so you just try to get that to trickle down into the overall gestalt of the company. And I think that's one good way to do it. You cannot compel someone to be compassionate. You know, hopefully people learn how to be better at it over their lifetime, but you can't compel them to do that. And there's no financial incentive that's going to enable that. You have to find people where that's already sort of an integral part of their essence.
Mm-hmm. And you're challenging with some of these ideas, Sharon. Well, it strikes me you're challenging the inertia of the industry. The financial demands of a for-profit proposition, a for-profit enterprise. You're challenging in the hiring process, speed to deliver. You need a resource. You need a talented person. Okay, who's the most talented? Let's hire them. So, in everything you've talked about in these couple different areas, you're really challenging some of the old or the paradigms of the industry that you're in. I'm wondering what is it that enables you to have, I'm going to call it courage, because I sense it does take a bit of courage or a lot of courage to challenge the inertia that is in the industry.
That's a good question. And I don't look at it as courage. I look at it sort of as the way that I'm wired. But I will say also that this wasn't something that was just naturally innate in me. I saw this in action. I saw how powerful this was in action. And when I was very young and in the industry, and I watched one team within a large company that I was in that was outperforming everyone. They were more productive, when hard work needed to be done, these people just dove in and did it in a way that you can't pay individuals to do. They have to do it because they're committed. And so I thought, I want to see how this happens, because you can't buy this. You can only encourage it. You can only develop it. So I watched the leader of that group work. And what I learned was that when you're doing something fabulous and wonderful and everyone has to work hard, at the end of it, there is always a celebration. And this particular person saw that there was always room on the celebration float to bring everyone up to enjoy the achievement and to also encourage and reward along the path. And there was never this, demanding timeline thing. All the timelines were always hit because everyone bought into the process. So I tried to learn as much as I could by watching that leader and incorporate that for two reasons. One, it felt better. It felt better because I don't like to have to work with people where I have to be strict with them and always correcting them or guiding them into a performance improvement program. That's very difficult. And this is already a stress-filled business. But when you identify the right people and you offer them these more positive ways of doing things, we have a team that actually, to me, is able to work wonders. Our Aricept team, this drug is still number one in the world after more than a quarter of a century. That team was tiny. We were infinitesimally small, but it was everyone bringing the same idea about what we were trying to accomplish. There were larger companies working in the same space with many more millions of dollars to throw at the project. They were throwing the money, they weren't throwing the commitment. And so when you are able to lead in this manner and get everyone on this team where you have a committed mission, you can do amazing things. And when you do those amazing things too, that reward, it's almost, I can't even describe it. Much better than financial rewards are great, yes. Making the business successful is great, yes. But when you really stand back and look at the product, it's like looking at a work of art. You appreciate it. You appreciate everything about it. Every sense. All your five senses are involved in this.
Yeah, it strikes me. I'm going back to the word I chose courage, but as I'm listening to you, Sharon, the word I think is creating shared individual, but also shared commitment. That is, if we want to call it a secret sauce of this type of energizing those type of teams and those type of individuals, is that leader knew the art of creating commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's a better word than courage?
I think you need a bit of both, because there's always pressure to go in a different direction, always tremendous pressure to do that. So you do have to have the internal steel sometimes that you hide behind the velvet glove and the smile to let you continue to lead your people, your team, your company the way you think is best. That's not always easy, but I think the shared commitment perspective that you bring, that's it. And as I watched this leader work, and I watched this leader for a few years, the whole time I was at this company, I was always watching to see how they dealt with difficulty, how it was navigated through. The retention rate of people on that team was amazing. Mm-hmm. And this is an industry where turnover can be very high. So lessons learned. You watch and you try to take away the best of it and use it to create something special that you're the leader of.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing we haven't touched on yet, but that I'm curious about the relationship, is your deep involvement in Olympic figure skating as a judge, and the witnessing of human performance. And mm-hmm. So you get, as a judge, you get to witness just remarkable human performance. Just as you're developing drugs, you get to be a witness to remarkable individual and team, but human performance. I'm wondering, what's the relationship in your experience of both of those worlds? What's the connection for you?
It's actually quite similar because in any country that participates in this sport and any of their officials, as an official, you are watching performance and you're doing it in a very objective manner to make sure that you're being fair. But there's also an interaction because you see these athletes over many, many years. Sometimes with our US athletes, they're going to be kids that I've seen skating since they were 9, 10, 12 years old. And you watch them develop over time. And it's not in isolation because they get feedback. They come for feedback because they want to know, what do the officials want to see? How can we be better? And you provide that feedback to them. You do that in the same way because an athlete, bringing them to high performance, there's a huge psychological component to it. So you meter out when you provide real constructive criticism and when you provide the criticism in a way that's going to sort of wind them up so they can go out and perform. If you look at the tremendous pressure these athletes are under when they go into an arena filled with people, and you're watching a 14-year-old perform under pressure in that setting, it's something that I never will know what that feels like, ever, ever, ever. And so what I want to do when I'm working with them and what I want to do when I'm near them in a competition, even just going by in a hallway, is to make sure that their head can be in the game, that they're not going to be worried about this, that, and the other thing, or this judge likes this and that judge likes that. I want them to know always that they're going to be supported and we want them to be their best. The judging is going to be objective. That's just the way it goes. But there is an energy exchange that you have with those athletes just walking by. And you always want to make sure that regardless of the country, regardless of the athlete, that you sort of share a positive vibe. So in addition to working with our own US athletes, you have good relationships with athletes from other countries as well. I always make sure they know my name. I know their name. Hi, hello, good luck today. After a performance, gee, I'm so sorry that happened, but you'll work on it and it will be the better the next time. It's just always an exchange that you try to make it positive. Mm-hmm. And I can't conceive of the pressure that they're under. So I look at part of an extension of our job as officials is to try to make that easier for them, not hard on them. You don't sit there in your chair and scowl. You don't avoid them in the hall, or if you're next to them in the dining room picking up your food, you reach out, you're kind.
Mm-hmm. And obviously in those roles, you're not in a quote unquote traditional leadership role, but as you were describing that environment of support, of encouragement, of feedback, of objectivity in that feedback, I almost had the sense that a leader who's listening to this could apply some of those exact same principles into how they're leading their team. You think that's true?
Very similar. I do think that's true, and that's a great observation because it is so much the same. I will say that as I matured as an official, because you start at a low level with local competitions and local skaters, and not everyone moves to the level where they can judge an Olympics. And I will tell you that's an overwhelming experience. And as I sat in my chair and the gravity of it was sinking into my brain, and that great responsibility, and also the honor of being able to do that for athletes of this caliber, it's really quite overwhelming. You work up to that. So I developed my skills as an official the same way I developed my skills in business leadership. It takes time, it takes effort. You have to want to do it. And again, you try to look for role models around you and see, okay, how is this person approaching this? And do I like this? And when they're talking with other officials, how do they comport themselves? And what works? What's successful? What's going to make this the best setting and the most relaxed setting for competition? A good, honest playing field for everyone. So different questions are asked, but it's the same basic principle. And it took time to build those skill sets.
Yeah, and the one thing that I get as you're describing your journey is there's not even a sniff of entitlement. It's beginning at the bottom, at the local rank, or at the entry level manager position, whatever domain we're talking about. And it's observation, effort, work, developing your perspective and your skill set. There's not a whiff of entitlement to anything that you've described in terms of your journey.
Well, I'm flattered that you feel that way. I am, and I try to. I don't feel entitled, and I don't really think anyone should. My beginnings were quite humble, and I worked very hard for everything that I got along the way. And I think the important thing to step forward and again, it was this my friend's father, who had the great thing about your job is 3 times better than their job, always talked about the fact that watch people who are climbing the ladder in the company, watch how they treat others, and always remember that what goes up must come down. And where do you want to be? Because sooner or later, and I love this fact, we talk about Gen Z a lot. I think they're going to save us in many ways. They're young, they're raw, but they have this passion. And I look at them, I look at this new level of leadership, and I realize their time is coming. And they're in a state of moving forward that I was at one time, where I made a boatload of mistakes. And they're going to make a boatload of mistakes as they move up, but I'm inspired by them. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'm on this more terminal place in my life where I'm at this pinnacle. What goes up must come down. How you treat people on the way up, how you forge your path up, often has a lot to do with how graceful the path down is when the new leadership comes into play. And if I'm lucky, if I'm really lucky, that journey will be graceful.
No. Yeah, I'm wondering, as you talk about gracefulness, you talk there's been a thread of positivity throughout everything we've talked about, even when we first met in that conversation. I'm wondering, in a world where there's a fair bit of negativity, how do you orient yourself to that type of environment? Is it tolerance? Is it an effort to change the other perspective? How do you face that the negativity?
It's another good question. You ask a lot of good questions, Steph, and I thank you for that. I think part of it is I never look to change other people. That can be an impossible task. And I like to try to lead by example. But the other thing is I realize that sometimes when people are reacting, their viewpoint, where they come from, what's forging the way they behave, has a great deal to do with what they came from, what's behind them. Sometimes it has to do with sort of innate sensitivity to people around them. It has to do with one's ability to be content. What is content? And I am convinced that there are some people that are never going to be happy because they're always looking at what they don't have instead of what they do have. And there are going to be people who are angry because they will see other people are things come easier to them, and they know they will never get them no matter how hard they try for whatever reason. Certainly with economically disadvantaged people, this is an anger that has been brewing for some time, and it's going to create some major explosions over the next few years if we don't contend with that. Inequality is part of life. Inequality is Darwinian. Inequality is not something we can try to be better than our hardwiring, but in order to be better, you have to have insight into where the urges to behave a certain way are coming from. And that's hard to come by. And I think realizing some people are not going to be able to do that for whatever reason allows you to just take it in, recognize it for what it is, and go on. It's unsatisfying to not be able to help someone feel better about where they are, but it's just not always possible.
Mm. And how do you mentor or coach the leaders in your organization in dealing with just a variety of people that you just described? You might have someone in one of your teams at Amyriad. What's your approach to supporting the development, the growth, and then thereby the leadership or the approach of that leader? What's your approach to coaching or mentoring them?
Well, if I've done a good job in selecting the people I'm coaching and mentoring, it's a little bit easier because they're going to know what to expect from me. They're going to know what I expect of them. And occasionally, though, you do have to have these conversations where, and the talk is usually, I can present you with opportunities for growth. I can present you with these opportunities. I cannot make you accept them. And so here are areas where I think you're doing really well in advancing yourself. Here are some areas where I think you're still lagging behind. Let's see what type of resources we can put together to help you in those areas. But bear in mind, I am expecting this to improve. And as long as it's done in a constructive way, if the person's got it in them to take that next step in their own development, to blossom a little bit more, that will happen. But sometimes you do find out where someone's limit is, where you've taken them as far as they can go in our organization or in the career path they're on. And if I really feel like I've taken someone about as far as they can go, and I'm not going to be able to promote them anymore or give them any additional responsibilities, is still endeavor to try to make every day that they're there working as productive as it can possibly be. It's, I don't even know how to phrase this, but it's always a little sad for me when I realize I've taken them as far as they can go. We can continue to have a fantastic working relationship together, but I'm not going to be able to get them to expand into this area in a way that's going to let them take the next step up in their career development. And it happens. I mean, we all reach our limits. I think the book, The Peter Principle, if you ever read that, is exactly that. People, except the phrasing was so coarse, because people rise to the level of their incompetence. And that's a really harsh way to say it. But I'd say people can rise under the right circumstances to their limits. They can get, you want to try to get someone, you'll never get someone to 100% of what they can be, because that's very difficult. But if you can try to get them as close to that, pull out as much as you can, that's a success. But we're created equally in some ways, but not equally in others, whether it's just genetic intelligence, facility for emotional relationships and instinct, insight. There are a lot of intangibles that are important in this, and everyone is hardwired to some extent to be able to have certain skill sets. There are epigenetic influences from the time that they were raised as children. And some people are defined by those epigenetic influences and have a hard time getting out of the box of their childhood. Other people are so resilient and are able to move way beyond where their childhood was. I wish I knew what all the reasons were for this to happen or not happen for people. That would be a valuable thing to tap into. But I don't, and I'm not going to. And so the next best thing is for me to try to recognize where I think we are together on their development.
And I get that from you as I'm listening that there's an element of just being with people. Whatever those factors are, is there's acceptance, and I get that you put a high value in just being with them, being with the people that you've been fortunate enough to be able to do life with, wherever that might be.
Mm-hmm. I enjoy that part of it. I enjoy that interaction, and everyone needs that. So we do a lot of remote work. Our company is grounded in remote interaction, and remote interaction is great, but we have regular team summits. where we can all get together and see each other and celebrate as a team. And that provides a lot that's not immediately clear. It's not just that we're in a group, but think about, again, I talked earlier about all the five senses. So there's olfactory senses, visual senses. You can feel someone else's energy sort of crackling from them. And when you're together on a semi-regular basis, you get to exchange that energy. You get to have a closer feeling for the people who are around you. I really think that's necessary. I don't think day-to-day office interaction is all that productive. And a lot of times when people are chafing with each other, it just accentuates it. Most of the people at this level, this type of business, are good at working independently and get a lot done that way. So I like a nice merger, a bit of personal interaction, and then always making sure, even on a Zoom interaction like we're having here, that there's this opportunity to sort of dig a few layers deeper and talk about things.
Mm. Yeah. For our final question, Sharon, I'm going to give you the magic wand, and you get to wave it over every CEO in the life science space around the world. And with the wave of the wand, you get to seed in their minds one conversation that they're going to have over the next week with their people, one person or more than one person. What's that one conversation that you want to put into the hearts and minds of every life science CEO across the world?
For the people who are reporting into them, that they wish to develop, that they wish to make good team members, that they wish to commit to the idea of the company, there's one question. There's only one question, but asking the question isn't enough, Jeff. They can't just ask the question. They need to listen to the answer and pull out a more fulsome answer if they need to. And it starts with, how are you? And I don't mean, are you groggy from waking up in the morning? I mean, how are you? Where you actually have a chance to go through a few layers. And I appreciate learning about what's happening. I like learning about people's families, their hobbies, their dogs, whatever. All that gives insight. But to ask that question and to listen to the answer. Really listen to the answer.
Yeah. I had a CEO who was a client. We worked on a question like that, and she would ask, how is your heart?
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing. And then she attended to what they had to say, really listened. And people looked at her sideways at first, like, well, what is that? What kind of question is that? But over time, the more she asked it, the deeper that she was able to go and to really understand where someone was coming from and what was going on for them.
She's right. Each and every time you ask that question, regardless of how you phrase it, to the same person, you're going to draw more out of them because you're revisiting it with them. You're showing that you see them in a very meaningful way, not just as a person on an org chart, but you see them and you're interested in them. And it's, it's a general question is, how close are we on the deadline?
Yeah, that's pretty
And
cool.
that has to be asked, it has to be asked. The business does come first, but that's a small thing. And when you ask the question, when one asks that question, that CEO, when they ask the question, they need to actually be interested in the answer. So it can't be a pro forma. Got to be interested in the answer. Really listen to it.
Such wisdom and such a simple bit for folks just to go one level deeper and then one level deeper. So thank you for that. Sharon, this has been such a privilege. I'm really just I'm ecstatic about this conversation. If people want to know, if people want to know more about you or about Amyriad, where can we send them?
You can always go to our website. And when you go to our website, which is amyriadtherapeutics.com, and you can even just plug our hashtag into Google, memories are worth fighting for. because that says everything that you need to know about us, and everything about our website design has a little bit of a reflection of the personalities of the people in our company. We're very diverse, just a well-integrated machine. Everything drives from compassion. And so our website is a little bit unusual in its appearance, but it reflects who we are as a group. And interestingly enough, everybody, and from our beginning skeleton company, everyone had the opportunity to provide input into the appearance and personality of that website. Because again, that's the idea. And in a startup, you're actually small enough that you can do this. You can't do this in a large cap environment. But in a startup, you're also asking people to work tremendously hard, more hours than they would ever work in a regular large cap job. And so everyone has a piece of themselves in defining what our company looks like to others. So that is a good place to start.
Awesome. We will put that in the show notes. And I encourage everybody who is touched by this conversation, if you're interested, to check out Sharon and what her team at Amyriad are doing. Sharon, thanks so much. What a pleasure.
It was good to see you again, Jeff. Let's not make it too long before we talk again. It was a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much.